Picture this. It's the late afternoon of August 12th, 1961.
Right.
And you are standing in West Berlin. Now, if you know your Cold War history, you know that that date isn't just, a random day on the calendar.
Yeah, it's a literal ticking clock.
Exactly. Because the very next day, the barbed wire is going to be unrolled. The Berlin Wall is going to physically and ideologically really slice the entire city in half.
Yeah.
But right now, in this specific hour, the border is still open. And this handsome 31-year-old man just walks right into the Tempelhofer Dam police station.
With a woman, right, about the same age?
Yeah, his wife. And he walks up to the front desk, speaks in this very confident German, but with a super heavy, distinct Slavic accent. And he just very politely asks the officers to arrest him.
I mean, you really have to try and place yourself in the minds of those West Berlin police officers working the desk that day.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
Right. It's a quiet afternoon. The political tension in the city is already just palpable. And suddenly this guy strolls in and totally shatters their reality.
Mm-hmm.
He tells them, completely deadpan, that he's a KGB assassin.
Just right out of the gate.
Right out of the gate.
Yeah.
He says he's fleeing his handlers, and he tells them that he is the ghost who murdered the exiled Ukrainian leaders, Stepan, Bandera, and Rebet, down in Munich. And then he just demands that they call the Americans.
And the officers are just staring at him like he stepped off a spaceship or something. I mean, it actually takes them hours to even process the claim, let alone take the guy seriously.
Which is terrifying given the timeline.
Totally. But finally, by 9 o'clock that night, they actually make the call to U.S. intelligence. And then just 3 hours later, midnight, the East German army rolls out to the sector border and the Iron Curtain physically descends.
Yeah, he beats the wall by a margin of hours. It's wild.
It really is.
Yeah.
So welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to unpack the anatomy of this Cold War assassin. His name is Bohdan Stashinsky.
And we're going to explore how, a young student from a rural village was essentially dismantled and rebuilt by the Soviet intelligence apparatus into this lethal weapon.
Yeah, we'll look at the literal sci-fi level poison weapons he wielded and ultimately the profound psychological guilt that drove him to just burn his own life to the ground.
To do this, we are drawing from an incredibly rich stack of source materials today. We've got historical archival excerpts, some really deep analytical dives into the KGB's secretive 13th Department.
Which is fascinating stuff, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. Plus, we have the translated transcripts from his historic West German trial and Serhiy Plukhy's masterful historical account, The Man with the Poison Gun.
So to start, I feel like the natural assumption when you hear the phrase KGB assassin is to picture like a fanatic.
Right, for sure. You imagine someone bred in a secret facility, indoctrinated from birth.
Exactly, like this ideologically pure super soldier for the Soviet state. But the sources we have paint a picture of Stashinsky's origins that is, well, it's terrifyingly banal.
Yeah.
He wasn't born a killer. He was manufactured through leverage.
And that right there is the defining characteristic of mid-century Soviet intelligence recruitment. I mean, they didn't require true believers. Belief can waver,
Right.
They required assets who were fundamentally trapped. And to understand the trap that they built for Bohdan Stashinsky, we really have to look at the geography and the politics of his childhood. So he was born in 1931 in Borchevich, which is this small village in western Ukraine.
And his family, it's important to note, they are not singing the praises of Stalin. Not at all.
No, definitely not.
The region was a huge focal point of resistance. Plokhy's book details that Stashinsky's family actively supported the Ukrainian insurgent army, the UPA.
Which was a very fierce anti-Soviet underground resistance movement. They were operating in the forests and the villages.
Yeah, and Stashinsky's three sisters were actually active members of the organization. They were running communications and supplies.
Right. And the Soviet security apparatus at the time, which was the MGB, the precursor to the KGB, they were systematically trying to crush this insurgency. But their methodology wasn't just, brute military force. It was social vivisection.
Wow.
They wanted to map out these really tight-knit village networks and just tear them apart from the inside. But infiltrating a rural village where everyone knows everyone, I mean, that's nearly impossible for an outsider.
You stick out like a sore thumb.
Exactly. So they needed a wedge.
And that wedge presents itself in the summer of 1950. So Stashinsky is a 19-year-old student at a teacher training college. And he's on a train heading to Lviv to visit his parents, and the transport police catch him riding without a ticket.
It's just so crazy.
I know, it is the most mundane, everyday infraction you can possibly imagine. Like, put yourself on that train car, you're a broke student, you skip the fare, and suddenly you are pulled into a small room by state security.
Because under normal circumstances, fare evasion is what? A fine. Maybe a slap on the wrist.
Right. It's almost like getting pulled over for a busted taillight and being forced to become a hitman.
That is the perfect analogy. Because the MGB had cross-referenced his identity. They knew exactly who his family was, and more importantly, they highly suspected his sister's connections to the underground. So the MGB officer conducting the interrogation, he does not care about the train ticket.
Not even a little bit.
No. He presents this 19-year-old kid with a catastrophic ultimatum.
It's the ultimate psychological vice. The officer essentially says, look, you are going to become an informer for us right now, and if you refuse, your sisters, your parents, your entire extended family, they will all be arrested, loaded onto cattle cars, and deported to the gulags in Siberia.
And this is just the textbook anatomy of state coercion. The MGB wasn't trying to persuade him of the virtues of Marxist-Leninist ideology, right?
No, they didn't care what he believed.
Exactly. They engineered a scenario where any choice he made would destroy a part of him. I mean, if he says no, he's responsible for the death or imprisonment of his entire family. But if he says yes, he has to betray his own community in his own flesh and blood.
And he chooses his family. He signs the paper, he takes the code name Ole, and just like that, the student is gone. And his very first assignment is so devastatingly simple. They tell him, go back home, sit at the dinner table, listen to your sisters, and report back to us.
And the archival documents show he was brutally effective at this. Through the trust of his sisters, he gained access to the inner workings of the UPA in his entire region.
Which is just heartbreaking.
It is. He funneled that intelligence directly to his MGB handlers. He provided the exact coordinates of UPA bunkers hidden deep in the forests. And that intelligence, it led directly to MGB raids, heavy gunfights, and the subsequent execution of several key insurgent leaders.
I really just want to pause on the psychology of that for a second, because he is sitting in a room knowing the information he just handed over on a little slip of paper is going to result in the men his sisters idolize being shot in the woods.
Yeah, the weight of that is immense.
But because he is so efficient, the MGB realizes he's kind of wasting his potential as just a low-level village informant. So in 1953, they pull him out of his studies entirely and send him to Kyiv. They basically decide they're going to build a bespoke intelligence operative.
Right. And the training regimen in Kyiv over the next 2 years was exhaustive. They completely isolated him. The curriculum covered Marxist ideology, the principles of conspiracy, advanced spycraft, counter-surveillance, and hand-to-hand combat.
All the classic spy stuff.
All of it. But it went far beyond just the physical and tactical training. The state was building a man who was meant to blend into Western Europe.
Yeah, the sources detail how they taught him how to behave at a high society dinner. They literally gave him dancing lessons, and they drilled him in the German language. Though I have to say, the sources point out an incredibly ironic flaw in their system here.
Oh, the language training.
Yes, their German language instruction was terribly academic and rigid.
It really reveals this fascinating blind spot in the Soviet bureaucracy. Because they had access to incredible resources, right? Yet they taught him this highly formalized textbook version of German that was heavily accented with Soviet inflections.
Which is wild.
Yeah. They were training him to infiltrate post-war Germany, a place that is just teeming with distinct regional dialects and colloquialisms. But they equipped him with a linguistic profile that would immediately sound suspicious, or at least foreign, to a native speaker.
So, to cover for this linguistic gap, when they finally deploy him in 1954, they give him a highly specific legend, a backstory. He's officially stripped of the name Bohdan Stashinsky. To the world, he is now Josef Leman.
Right.
And his backstory is that he's a repatriated Pole living in East Germany, born to German parents, which neatly excuses any weird quirks in his accent. But internally, his handlers call him Taras. And they place him in East Berlin, operating out of the massive Soviet intelligence compound in Karlshorst.
So he is now fully integrated into the machine. But to really understand what the machine intends to do with him, we need to look at a specialized, highly secretive unit within the newly formed KGB.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So by the mid-1950s, Soviet intelligence strategy was shifting, and Stashinsky was absorbed into the 13th Department.
And if you look at the historical timeline in our sources, the Soviet state always had a mechanism for what they called a mokria dela, which translates to wet affairs, the spilling of blood.
Yeah, assassinations.
Right. In the 1930s, under Stalin, it was the administration of special tasks. During World War II, it was Espionage, which focused on hunting down spies and saboteurs behind enemy lines.
And following the war, it morphed into Spetsbureau Number 1 under the MGB. But the creation of the 13th Department under the KGB in 1954, that represented a real modernization of murder.
How so?
Well, this unit, which was headquartered in Moscow, had a singular mandate: the systematic liquidation of high-value exile leaders, defectors, and political opponents operating abroad.
But the geopolitical landscape of the Cold War had changed, right? The Soviet Union was actively trying to project this image of legitimacy and stability on the world stage. They couldn't just send a squad of guys with submachine guns into a Western European capital anymore.
Exactly. You've hit on the core problem the 13th Department faced. An overt assassination, like a bullet, a car bomb, a knifing, is a massive liability.
Because it leaves proof.
Right. It immediately triggers a massive homicide investigation by Western police forces. It creates political martyrs out of the victims, and it invariably leads to a diplomatic crisis pointing straight back to the Kremlin. So the 13th Department realized that the perfect assassination shouldn't look like an assassination at all.
Because a bullet is a murder, but a sudden heart attack on a morning walk, that's just a tragedy.
Precisely. No police investigation, no international outcry.
And to achieve this, the KGB relied on a facility that honestly sounds like it belongs in a James Bond movie, but the sources confirm it was entirely real. It was called Laboratory 12, sometimes referred to simply as the Chamber.
Laboratory 12 was the dark heart of Soviet scientific research. It was this clandestine facility staffed by brilliant chemists and pharmacologists whose sole directive was to synthesize poisons, toxins, and delivery mechanisms that could induce death while perfectly mimicking natural causes.
They needed substances that would leave virtually no forensic footprint for Western medical examiners to find.
Yeah. And what the engineers at Lab 12 delivered to the 13th Department was just a masterpiece of lethal engineering. They built a cyanide gas spray gun.
Which is crazy, because when you think of a gun, you think of a barrel, a grip, a trigger guard. This was nothing like that.
No, not at all. The archival descriptions of the weapon are chilling in their simplicity. It was a compact, lightweight aluminum cylinder, roughly the size and shape of an adult's index finger.
Wow, that's small.
Yeah. It was designed to be easily palmed in the hand or concealed inside a rolled-up newspaper.
And the mechanics are fascinating. Inside this little metal tube was a very fragile glass ampoule containing liquid hydrogen cyanide. The device featured a spring-loaded firing pin and a small trigger button. So when the assassin pressed the trigger, the pin launched forward and shattered the glass ampoule.
Right. And the release of pressure instantly atomized the liquid cyanide. It forced the chemical out of the front of the tube, and a highly concentrated, invisible, and virtually silent jet of poisonous vapor.
Unbelievable.
So the operative simply had to point the tube at the victim's face from a distance of about 18 inches and just press the button.
Okay, but hold on. Let's look at the physics of this for a second, because you are an assassin standing 18 inches away from your target.
Right.
You fire a cloud of lethal hydrogen cyanide gas directly into the space between the two of you. How do you not immediately kill yourself? The gas doesn't just politely stay on the victim's side of the sidewalk.
And that was the most significant operational hurdle Laboratory 12 had to solve. Because hydrogen cyanide is violently lethal, and it dissipates into the surrounding air in seconds. The margin for error was completely non-existent.
So what did they do?
To ensure the operative survived their own weapon, the KGB developed a really strict countermeasures protocol. Before the assassin even approached the target, they had to prepare a small glass capsule of amyl nitrite, which is a potent chemical antidote, and wrap it in a porous gauze pad.
So the procedure was, you fire the poison and then immediately crush the antidote pill and inhale it.
Precisely. Amyl nitrite acts as a powerful vasodilator. It rapidly expands the blood vessels and temporarily alters the hemoglobin in the blood, which creates a chemical buffer that basically prevents the cyanide from binding to the cells.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The operative had to crush the gauze pad and breathe deeply through it the very second they pulled the trigger. It allowed them to walk safely right through the dissipating toxic cloud while the victim collapsed.
But the KGB didn't just hand this contraption to Stashinsky in an office and say, good luck. They made him prove he could use it without dying.
Yeah, the field test.
The sources describe this horrifying field test. They take Stashinsky into the dense woods outside the Karl Torst compound in East Berlin, and they tie a stray dog to a tree.
Right.
Stashinsky has the weapon in his hand. He crushes his antidote capsule, holds it to his nose, steps up to the dog, and pulls the trigger.
And the dog drops dead instantly. There's no struggle, no sound. The victim inhales the atomized gas, and the cyanide immediately starves the heart and brain of oxygen. It triggers a massive, catastrophic cardiac arrest.
Just boom, gone.
Gone. And because the gas evaporates so incredibly fast, a standard autopsy would find absolutely no chemical residue. A medical examiner would simply conclude the heart stopped.
Armed with this invisible weapon, Stashinsky receives his orders. The 13th Department is sending him into West Germany, and his target city is Munich.
We really have to contextualize Munich's role in the Cold War during the late 1950s. After the devastation of World War II, Munich had become the absolute epicenter for the Ukrainian diaspora and the exile community.
It was a thriving hub of anti-Soviet political resistance, underground publishing, and intelligence gathering.
Exactly. If you're sitting in the Kremlin looking at a map of Europe, Munich is just a glowing red beacon of subversion. And the KGB has two specific names pinned to the board, Lev Rebet and Stepan Bandera.
Right. Now, looking at the historical records regarding these two men, it's essential that we look at them objectively without romanticizing the resistance, because Rebet and Bandera were both prominent, deeply influential leaders within the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, the OUN.
Yeah.
But by the time Stashinsky arrived in Munich, the OUN was not a unified front. It was deeply, bitterly fractured.
It was. The split had actually happened years earlier, in 1940. Bandera was the leader of the militant wing, the OUNB.
Yeah.
And the sources are very clear about his faction's history. They describe him as an uncompromising authoritarian figure.
And his followers had actively collaborated with Nazi Germany during the early stages of the invasion of the Soviet Union.
Right. His faction was also implicated in horrific massacres of Polish civilians in western Ukraine, pursuing this vision of an ethnically homogenous state.
And then on the other hand, you have Lev Rebet. And he represented a very different ideological path. He had originally been a comrade of Bandera, but he broke away to lead the OUNZ faction.
Yeah, Rebet evolved into more of a leading intellectual and political theorist for the exile community. He explicitly rejected Bandera's authoritarian methods and his fascist leanings.
Rebet believed that for the Ukrainian nationalist movement to survive and gain Western support, it really had to embrace democratic principles. He was a professor at the Ukrainian Free University in Munich, basically fighting the Soviets with the pen rather than the sword.
So you have these two men who absolutely despise the Soviet Union, but who also fundamentally despise each other's vision for Ukraine.
Which begs a really big strategic question. Why would Moscow expend immense resources to assassinate both of them? I mean, if they're already fighting each other, why not just let them tear the diaspora apart naturally?
Because the KGB didn't just want to eliminate threats. They wanted to weaponize the paranoia of the exile community.
Oh.
The strategy was brilliant in its malice. First, you decapitate the movement by removing its most intelligent theorist and its most militant figurehead. Second, by killing them with an undetectable weapon that mimics natural causes, you create a vacuum filled with suspicion.
Right. It's like tossing a match into a room full of gunpowder and locking the door. If prominent leaders start dropping dead mysteriously, the rival factions aren't going to blame a secret Soviet poison gun that nobody knows exists.
No, they are going to blame each other.
Exactly.
The KGB calculated that these unexplained deaths would ignite violent internal purges, basically destroying the OUN from within. It was psychological warfare executed through pharmacology.
So, with the targets acquired and the psychological trap set, Stashinsky begins his hunt. Let's trace the exact mechanics of these two assassinations, starting with the first operation. It's October 12th, 1957. The target is Lev Rebet.
So Stashinsky had been conducting intense surveillance on Rebet for days. He mapped out his daily routine meticulously. He knew that Rebet worked at the editorial office of a Ukrainian émigré newspaper, which was located on Karlsplatz, a busy central square in Munich.
And it's a crisp autumn morning, just after 9 o'clock. Stashinsky leaves his hotel. He is carrying a rolled-up newspaper. And inside that newspaper is the aluminum cylinder from Laboratory 12.
He takes a tram to Karlsplatz and waits near the tram stop. Shortly after, he spots Lev Rebet stepping off a streetcar, carrying a briefcase.
Rebet walks toward his office building, and Stashinsky just falls in behind him, maintaining a discreet distance. Rebet enters the building and begins walking up the stairs.
Right. Stashinsky moves quickly, bypassing the ground floor and hurrying up a different set of stairs to intercept him on the landing.
Put yourself in Stashinsky's body right now. I mean, your heart has to be pounding. You have a capsule of antidote in your left hand and a tube of cyanide in your right.
And he hears Rebet's footsteps echoing on the wooden stairs below.
Stashinsky turns and starts walking down the stairs, timing his descent perfectly to cross paths with Rebet.
As they pass each other on the narrow staircase, Stashinsky raises the rolled-up newspaper, aiming it directly at Rebet's face.
He presses the trigger, the glass ampoule shatters, the jet of atomized cyanide strikes Rebet, and Stashinsky instantly crushes the gauze pad in his left hand, inhaling the amyl nitrite fumes deeply.
Rebet gasps, stumbles forward, and collapses against the wall. But Stashinsky doesn't run.
No.
He just keeps walking down the stairs and out the front door, disappearing into the morning crowd on Karlsplatz.
And a cleaning woman finds Rebet's body slumped on the landing a little over an hour later.
And the aftermath of this operation is what truly proved the terrifying genius of Laboratory 12. Because 2 days later, a respected Munich medical examiner, Dr. Wolfgang Span, conducts a thorough autopsy on Rebet.
And what does he find? Absolutely nothing suspicious.
Nothing. He diagnoses a sudden, massive coronary infarction, a completely natural heart attack.
Wow.
There are no puncture wounds, no signs of a struggle, and critically, there's no chemical trace of poison in the blood or tissue. The operation is an unqualified, flawless success. The West German police close the file.
So Stashinsky takes a train out of Munich, tosses the empty aluminum tube into a canal, and returns to East Berlin. He had successfully committed the perfect murder.
Yeah.
And because the weapon works so flawlessly, the 13th Department brings him back 2 years later for the main event, murder number 2, October 15th, 1959. The target is Stepan Bandera.
But the operational variables for Bandera were significantly more complex. Bandera was the highest profile enemy of the state, living in Munich under the alias Stefan Popel.
Right.
And because he was a militant leader with numerous enemies, he was acutely aware of his security. He almost never traveled without a bodyguard.
So the engineers at Lab 12 realized that a single-shot tube is useless against 2 men. If you gas the target, the bodyguard shoots you before you can even escape.
Exactly.
So they have to innovate. They engineer an upgraded weapon. Instead of a single aluminum tube, they build a double-barreled poison gas gun.
This new device was slightly bulkier, but it operated on the exact same principle. It held 2 separate glass ampoules of hydrogen cyanide. It was designed so the assassin could fire both berries simultaneously to neutralize 2 targets at once, or, sequentially if needed.
And Stashinsky tracks Bandera to his apartment building at Kreitmayerstrasse 7 in the Maxvorstadt district of Munich. Now, the KGB has provided Stashinsky with a specially crafted skeleton key that opens the heavy front door of the apartment block.
Right.
So on the afternoon of October 15th, Stashinsky unlocks the door, slips into the foyer, and he just waits.
And the sources place a really heavy emphasis on Stashinsky's psychological state during this specific operation.
Oh, yeah.
He is not the cold, calculating machine he was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
He's incredibly anxious. His adrenaline is surging. He is holding a weapon twice as deadly, and he's anticipating a violent confrontation with a bodyguard.
But when the heavy wooden door swings open, Bandera is alone. He had actually dismissed his bodyguard earlier that day. He's just carrying a basket of fresh tomatoes he bought at the market, and he's struggling with his keys.
So Stashinsky approaches him in this dimly lit hallway. Bandera looks up, startled. And in a moment of sheer panic and nervous adrenaline, Stashinsky doesn't just fire one barrel.
No.
He forcefully triggers both barrels of the weapon directly into Bandera's face at point-blank range.
Bandera lets out a choked cry, drops the tomato, and collapses backward onto the floor, his face just contorted as his heart seizes. Stashinsky inhales his antidote and flees the building in a state of absolute terror.
Yeah.
Neighbors hear the thud, they rush out, and they find Bandera dying on the floor. He actually expires in the ambulance on the way to the hospital.
But here is where the flawless science of the KGB crashes into the chaos of human error.
This is the turning point.
Right. The weapon was meticulously calibrated for a single, invisible dose. But by firing a massive double charge of cyanide gas at a range of mere inches, Stashinsky overwhelmed the covert design of the weapon.
When you look at the forensic outcome here, it is a complete 180-degree turn from the Rebet assassination. Because Bandera was known to carry a loaded pistol, the Munich police immediately suspected foul play, even though there were no bullet holes.
Yeah, they didn't just write it off.
Right, so they order a rigorous post-mortem examination led by Dr. Laves.
And Dr. Laves discovers 2 anomalies that completely shatter the illusion of a natural death. First, because Stashinsky fired both barrels so close to the target, the explosive force of the mechanism actually propelled microscopic splinters of the shattered glass ampoules directly into the skin of Bandera's face.
Incredible. And second, the sheer volume of the chemical delivered a massive overdose. It just didn't evaporate fast enough.
Exactly the opposite of what Lab 12 intended. The double dose saturated Bandera's tissues, leaving a distinct, undeniable olfactory signature on the body.
The smell.
Yes, Dr. Laves noted the overwhelming smell of bitter almonds. And in forensic pathology, the scent of bitter almonds is the absolute hallmark of heavy cyanide poisoning. Toxicological screening then confirmed a lethal concentration of cyanide in his stomach and blood.
It's just a stunning paradox. The Soviet state spent years and millions of rubles developing a scientifically perfect, untraceable weapon. But the human element, the sweaty palms and racing heart of a panicked 28-year-old operative, is what left the forensic breadcrumbs.
It really is.
That double pull of the trigger turned a quiet heart attack into a massive international homicide investigation.
The Munich police now had forensic proof of an assassination, but they were still completely in the dark. I mean, they had no weapon, no suspect, and really no idea how the poison was administered without a needle or a poisoned cup of tea.
Right, the physical trail went completely cold.
But the internal trail, the psychological damage within Stashinsky, was just beginning to manifest.
Because Stashinsky returns to Moscow, and administratively, he is the golden boy of the 13th Department, the mission is accomplished. He is summoned to this highly classified ceremony where the head of the KGB himself, Alexander Stepan, personally pins the Order of the Red Banner to his chest.
Which is one of the highest military decorations in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, but the historical accounts note a profound dissonance in Stashinsky during this period. The medal feels heavy and meaningless. The psychological toll of his actions is breaking through the conditioning.
Yeah, because taking a human life at point-blank range, watching a man's eyes roll back as you suffocate his heart, that creates a trauma that state medals just cannot erase.
And there's a specific visceral moment detailed in the sources that acts as the real catalyst for his unraveling. He's temporarily back in East Berlin. He goes to a local cinema to watch a movie.
Right.
And before the feature begins, the theater plays a standard newsreel. Suddenly, the screen fills with footage of Stepan Bandera's funeral in Munich.
You have to imagine the shock of that. Assassins rarely see the grief they cause. They see the target, they execute the mission, and they vanish.
Exactly.
But here, magnified on a massive silver screen in a dark room, Stashinsky is forced to really confront the human wreckage he left behind.
He watches footage of thousands of mourners, and then the camera pans to Bandera's family. Stashinsky sees the man's wife, dressed in black, weeping over the casket. He sees Bandera's children looking lost and totally devastated.
Yeah.
And the abstraction of, liquidating an enemy of the state just dissolves instantly. He realizes he destroyed a family.
The sources indicate he was deeply disturbed by this. He actually sought out his KGB handler, a man known by the codename Sergei, to express his profound feelings of guilt and moral confusion.
Which is a huge risk.
It is. This is a critical moment. Because how a handler responds to an agent in distress dictates that agent's future.
And Sergei fails spectacularly. He doesn't offer psychological support. He looks Stashinsky in the eye and tells him, completely devoid of empathy, not to worry. He tells him that Bandera was a monster and that his children will actually thank him later for removing their father from the world.
It was just a sociopathic response that completely alienated Stashinsky. It exposed the absolute moral bankruptcy of the system he was serving, and this internal moral awakening, it was being fiercely accelerated by the most important relationship in his life.
Right. Enter Inge Pol.
Yes.
Back in April 1957, which was between the two assassinations, Stashinsky was at a dance hall in East Berlin and met a young East German woman. They fell deeply in love. But there was a massive complication. Inge was fiercely, vocally anti-communist.
Yeah, she absolutely despised the Soviet occupation of East Germany.
Which placed Stashinsky in an incredibly dangerous position. He was living a complete double life. He courted her under his fake identity, Josef Lehman, claiming to be just a low-level translator. He hid his true name, his Soviet origins, and his employment as a KGB assassin from the woman he loved.
But the relationship progressed anyway. They got engaged, and eventually they married in April 1960. As they built a life together, Inge's strong moral compass really began to recalibrate his own.
Yeah.
In his later confessions, he explicitly stated that it was her unwavering sense of right and wrong that made him fully comprehend the depravity of what he had done. She became his tether to reality.
And the KGB's handling of this marriage is basically a masterclass in institutional hubris. I mean, intelligence agencies inherently demand loyalty, but the KGB demanded absolute totalitarian ownership over the lives of their operatives.
Definitely.
When Stashinsky requested permission to marry an East German civilian, his superiors initially refused outright.
Because they didn't trust her. They knew her politics.
Right. But Stashinsky dug his heels in. The KGB eventually relented, but with draconian conditions. They force Inge to move to Moscow with him, basically ripping her away from her family and isolating her in a foreign city where she didn't even speak the language.
And they didn't stop there. The archives reveal that the KGB actively bugged their Moscow apartment. They were listening to the private, intimate conversations of their most highly decorated assassin.
They treated him not as a hero, but as a total liability.
Exactly.
And the breaking point comes when Inge gets pregnant. Now, you would think the birth of a child would be a moment of joy. Instead, the KGB handler visits Stashinsky and formally demands that Inge abort the baby.
Which is just vile.
It is. The KGB views a child as an operational complication, an anchor that makes an agent harder to control and deploy.
And the audacity of that demand severed whatever remaining loyalties Stashinsky had to the state. The couple categorically refused the abortion. By attempting to aggressively dictate his humanity and destroy his family, the KGB pushed a wavering asset right past the point of no return.
And the tragedy just compounds in the summer of 1961. Inge, feeling suffocated in Moscow, manages to get permission to return to East Berlin to give birth to their son Peter. But the KGB refuses to let Stashinsky travel with her. They basically hold him hostage in Moscow to ensure she doesn't defect.
And then the unimaginable happens.
Yeah.
In August, baby Peter suddenly develops a severe fever. At just 4 months old, the infant dies in East Berlin.
Oh, it's awful.
The psychological devastation Stashinsky must have experienced is profound. He is grieving the death of his firstborn child, entirely isolated in Moscow, trapped by the very men who wanted the child dead in the first place.
Finally, reluctantly, the KGB grants him temporary leave to travel to East Berlin for the baby's funeral. But he is not traveling as a free man. He is surrounded by KGB watchers. They don't let him out of their sight for a second.
He arrives in East Germany a completely broken man. But grief and rage, they provide an incredible clarity. Sitting with his wife, mourning their son, they both realize that the KGB will never let them go.
No.
If he returns to Moscow, he will be a prisoner forever, or worse, quietly liquidated. So they make the decision they are going to run.
Which brings us back to the harrowing timeline of the defection we talked about earlier. It's August 12th, 1961, the day before the funeral. Stashinsky is staying with Inge at her parents' house in the town of Dalgau, just outside the Berlin city limits.
Right.
And the KGB surveillance teams are stationed all around the area, anticipating that the couple will take the train from the Dalgau station into Berlin the next morning for the burial.
But Stashinsky knows their operational patterns.
Yeah.
He knows if they go to the train station, they will be intercepted. So against direct orders, he gathers his documents.
Yeah.
Crucially, he packs his fake Josef Lehmann East German ID card, but he also smuggles out the hidden, classified documents that prove his true identity as Bohdan Stashinsky, KGB officer.
They sneak out of the house on foot. They don't take the roads. They hike cross-country through the fields and woods, putting miles between themselves and the KGB watchers, eventually reaching the neighboring town of Falkensee.
And from there, they manage to hail a taxi to take them into East Berlin.
But getting into East Berlin was only the first hurdle. The city was divided into sectors, Soviet, American, British, and French. To defect, they had to physically cross from the Soviet sector into West Berlin.
Right. On the afternoon of August 12th, the border was technically open to foot traffic and commuter trains, but it was heavily policed by East German border guards checking papers.
So Stashinsky walks up to the checkpoint. He hands over the Josef Lehmann ID card. It's a flawless KGB forgery because, well, the KGB made it.
Yeah, the best forgery you can get.
Exactly. So the guard waves them through. They board the S-Bahn, the elevated railway system, and the train rumbles across the invisible line, separating east from west.
They disembark at Gesundbrunnen, which is the very first station inside the French sector of West Berlin. They immediately hail another taxi and instruct the driver to take them to the Tempelhofer Dam police station near the American air base.
They walk through the doors, and we are back where we started, he confesses. And here is why the timeline is so historically staggering. The police drag their feet. They think he's a lunatic. They don't notify the U.S. authorities until 9:00 p.m.
If you look at the broader historical canvas, as Stashinsky is sitting in that interrogation room, the East German leadership under Walter Ulbricht is giving the final secret orders to seal the border.
It gives me chills.
Just 3 hours after the Americans are notified, at the stroke of midnight on August 13th, the military operation begins. East German troops tear up the streets, roll out miles of concertina wire, and establish the first barriers of the Berlin Wall.
It's breathtaking. Because if Stashinsky had hesitated for even a day, if he had waited to attend his own son's funeral the next morning, he would have woken up to a city permanently divided by barbed wire and machine gun towers.
Oh, without a doubt.
Every crossing point was sealed. He would have been trapped behind the Iron Curtain, and the KGB would have certainly executed him.
He escaped by a margin of mere hours. And the Americans quickly realize the magnitude of what they have. The CIA quietly flies Stashinsky out of West Berlin on a military transport to a safe house in Frankfurt.
Though initially the CIA interrogators are deeply skeptical. I mean, this guy walks in and says, I have a secret weapon that shoots poison gas and causes untraceable heart attacks. It sounds like bad pulp fiction.
It does. But his intelligence was undeniable. Stashinsky didn't just offer broad claims, he offered granular, verifiable data. He drew exact diagrams of the weapon. He described the specific locks on the doors in Munich.
Yeah.
He accurately recalled the weather, the clothes the victims were wearing, and the exact physical layout of the stairwells where the assassinations took place. He provided a complete architectural blueprint of the KGB's assassination program.
And the political value of his confession was just immeasurable, because for 2 years, the Soviet Union had been running a massive, highly successful disinformation campaign regarding the murder of Stepan Bandera.
The KGB had actively framed West Germany. They utilized their propaganda networks to accuse Reinhard Gehlen, the head of the West German intelligence service, the BND, of ordering the assassination.
Right.
Because Bandera had a controversial wartime record and several high-ranking West German officials had problematic ties to the former Nazi regime, the Soviet lie was highly effective. It sowed deep distrust between West Germany and its Western allies.
But Stashinsky's defection blew that lie to pieces. The CIA and the West German government realized they can't just leak a report. They need to put this ghost on a public stage to dismantle the Soviet narrative once and for all. And that stage is the High Court in Karlsruhe, West Germany.
The trial, which began in October 1962, was an international media sensation. The courtroom was packed with journalists from around the globe, as well as furious members of the Ukrainian exile community. And Stashinsky stood in the dock and offered a total, unvarnished confession.
He didn't make excuses. He walked the court through the entire timeline. The blackmail on the train, the intensive training, the creation of the 13th Department, the macabre science of Laboratory 12, the dog in the woods, the amyl nitrate antidote, and the precise, terrifying moments he pulled the trigger in Munich.
And the legal proceedings culminated in a verdict that represents a fascinating landmark in international law.
Oh, this is really interesting.
Yeah. The German court had to grapple with how to sentence a man who pulled the trigger, but who was also an instrument of a sovereign state. They applied a complex legal framework heavily influenced by the concept of Organisationsherrschaftslehre, or the control over the organization theory.
Okay, I want to make sure we really understand this, because it sounds like dense legal jargon. How does this theory actually work in practice?
In simplistic terms, traditional criminal law looks for the person who commits the physical act, the person holding the gun, right?
Right.
But Organisationsherrschaftslehre argues that in a highly structured, hierarchical, and coercive apparatus of power, like the Soviet state machinery, the true perpetrator of the crime is the person sitting behind a desk giving the orders.
Because the assassin is just a tool.
Precisely. The court recognized that the KGB leadership had complete control over the organizational apparatus. They engineered the weapon, selected the targets, and coerced the operative. Stashinsky was viewed less as an autonomous murderer and more as a fungible cog in a massive machinery of death.
Wow.
Yeah. If it hadn't been him, the state would have simply slotted another coerced agent into his place.
So the court looks at Stashinsky and essentially says, you are guilty of the physical act, but the primary murderer is your boss in Moscow.
Exactly. The verdict officially named KGB chairman Alexander Shelepin and the Soviet leadership as the primary instigators and perpetrators of the murders. Stashinsky was convicted merely as an accomplice, acting under extreme psychological coercion and state manipulation.
And because of that legal framing, he receives an incredibly lenient sentence for a double political homicide. The court sentences him to just 8 years in a West German prison. Even more astonishingly, some of the most prominent members of the Ukrainian exile community, recognizing the brutal reality of Soviet blackmail, publicly supported the verdict.
And the geopolitical fallout from the Karlsruhe trial was seismic. It deeply humiliated the Soviet Union on the global stage. It proved irrefutably that political assassinations weren't rogue actions by overzealous agents. They were core tenets of Soviet statecraft,
Right.
authorized at the highest echelons of the Kremlin.
The embarrassment was so severe that the KGB was forced to radically restructure. The infamous 13th Department was officially dissolved, eventually morphing into Department V, which focused slightly more on sabotage and deep cover illegals. But the practice of state-sponsored assassinations certainly didn't vanish.
No, absolutely not. But the forensic landscape is permanently altered, and that is arguably the most enduring legacy of the Stashinsky case. Before 1961, if a Soviet defector or an exile leader died suddenly of a heart attack in London or Paris, Western medical examiners usually took it at face value.
But after Karlsruhe, the illusion was broken. Western intelligence and forensic pathology labs realized that the KGB possessed the technology to engineer natural-looking deaths. They could no longer dismiss sudden cardiac arrests or strange illnesses in the diaspora.
It catalyzed the development of significantly more sophisticated toxicological screening protocols across Western Europe. And tragically, we can trace a direct, evolutionary line of lethal pharmacology from Laboratory 12 cyanide gun in the 1950s right up to the modern geopolitical era.
It's a chilling lineage, honestly. In the 1950s, it was atomized hydrogen cyanide. By 1978, Soviet-aligned intelligence had advanced to using a microengineered pellet of ricin, fired from a modified umbrella, to assassinate the Bulgarian dissident Georgy Markov on a bridge in London.
And the methodology continues to evolve with modern science. In 2006, the former Russian intelligence officer Alexander Litvinenko was assassinated in London. The weapon wasn't a gas gun, it was a microscopic dose of the highly radioactive isotope polonium-210 slipped into a pot of tea.
Right.
In 2018, the Russian double agent Sergei Skripal was targeted in the UK with Novichok, a military-grade nerve agent smeared on a door handle.
And we saw the exact same class of nerve agent used against Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny in 2020. I mean, the delivery mechanisms get more complex, the chemistry gets more exotic, but the core philosophy of the 13th Department remains entirely intact. Eliminate the enemy of the state using highly deniable, deeply terrifying scientific means that send an unmistakable message to anyone paying attention.
It all traces its conceptual roots back to that small aluminum tube hidden inside a rolled-up newspaper on a staircase in Munich.
So what actually happened to the man holding that newspaper? Bohdan Stashinsky served out his sentence in a West German prison. He was released early for good behavior in the late 1960s, and upon his release, he vanished from the face of the earth.
He became a ghost entirely. The historical record essentially stops. There are intelligence whispers and unconfirmed rumors that the CIA and West German intelligence brokered a deal to resettle him and Inge under new identities.
Yeah, some theories suggest they were relocated to South Africa. Others speculate they were hidden somewhere deep in the United States. But neither his location nor his subsequent life has ever been definitively confirmed. Let's summarize the immense journey we've taken today. We started with a 19-year-old student sitting on a train in Ukraine, riding without a ticket. We watched the Soviet state exploit that tiny, mundane vulnerability to blackmail him into betraying his own family. We saw him meticulously trained and engineered into the KGB's deadliest weapon, armed with a device straight out of science fiction. And ultimately, we saw him become the linchpin that brought the Soviet Union's most secretive assassination program into the light.
And he dismantled that program because of the one variable Laboratory 12 couldn't control. A state can build a flawless chemical weapon, and it can manufacture a perfect cover story, but it cannot entirely suppress the human conscience.
Right.
The visceral shock of watching a family mourn, the moral clarity provided by a principled spouse, the agonizing loss of his own child, those purely human elements ultimately shattered the state conditioning.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. Think about Bohdan Stashinsky's existence after he walked out of those prison gates. He spent the entirety of his youth erasing the lives of others, turning real people into statistics for the state. And then, to survive, the Western intelligence community had to completely erase his life.
It is a profound, inescapable irony.
What does it mean to live out the final decades of your life knowing that the entire world is looking for a ghost? Both your enemies, the exile community whose leaders you murdered, and your former masters in Moscow, who desperately want revenge for your betrayal, are hunting you. How does a man who was given a fake identity by the KGB to commit murder live out the rest of his life under yet another fake identity provided by the West just to survive? You are never Bohdan Stashinsky again. You're just a shadow hiding behind the wall you barely managed to escape.